I paid for that christening twice. Once with a check, once with a silence I didn't know I'd been keeping for 3 years. My father spent almost 2 decades saving silver dollars in a cigar box for a grandchild he never got to hold. And 4 days after the party, a woman I'd never spoken to called my cell phone and told me to come to the reception hall alone and not to say a word to my son. Welcome back, family. If you're new here, tell me what state you're watching from tonight, because I read every single one of your comments before I go to bed. If this is the kind of story that sits heavy in your chest, hit like before we start, because this one's going to earn it. My father's name was Walter Hensley, and he never had much, but he never let a Sunday pass without slipping a silver dollar into my hand when I was a boy, telling me a man who saves is a man who can be counted on. He drove a delivery truck out of Scranton, Pennsylvania for 34 years, 6 days a week, rain or shine, and the 7th day he spent at church, and then at the kitchen table doing the household books by hand, even after we got a computer, because he said numbers on paper don't lie to you the way numbers on a screen can. In the back of his hall closet, behind the winter coats, he kept 4 cigar boxes. Dutch Masters boxes, the wood ones, not the cardboard. Each one had a strip of yellowed tape across the top, with a name written on it in his blocky handwriting. Mine said Gerald, my sister's said Diane. And when my son Caleb was born, my father drove 2 hours in the snow to the hospital, held him for exactly 4 minutes because his hip was bad and he couldn't stand long, and then went home and started a 5th cigar box that same night. He wrote Caleb on the tape, and underneath it, smaller, he wrote, "For whatever that boy needs, whenever he needs it." He kept that promise for 19 years, 1 silver dollar and 1 folded 20 at a time, until his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in his own kitchen, the coffee still warm in the pot beside him. The last thing he asked me, 2 weeks before he passed, was whether Caleb had found himself a good church yet. I told him yes. I lied. I didn't want him worrying about that on top of everything else. My name is Gerald Hensley. I'm 63 years old. I run a small appliance repair shop on Chestnut Avenue in Allentown, the kind of place where the bell over the door still works because I fix it myself every time it sticks, and where men bring in toasters their grandfathers bought because they trust me not to tell them to just throw it away and buy new. My honest flaw, and I'll say it plain right at the start, is that I have always believed blood means something sacred, that a brother-in-law who married into this family took an oath the same as if he'd married my own daughter, and that oath should count for something even when a man starts showing cracks. I found out this spring exactly how wrong that belief could leave me standing, and it cost me more than I ever expected to lose. When my father passed 4 years ago, he left 5 cigar boxes behind the coats, and once we sat down and counted every silver dollar and folded bill, it came to just over $58,000, split 5 ways between me, my sister Diane, and my late brother's 3 children, who my father had raised half the time himself after their own dad died young. Caleb's box alone held almost $14,000, every cent of it marked in my father's own words on a card taped inside the lid, meant for whatever that boy needed, whenever he needed it. My sister Diane's husband, a man named Roy Feltner, offered to handle the money for the family. Roy had spent 20-some years in insurance sales, wore good suits, talked easy about compound interest and mutual funds at every holiday dinner, and I was working 6 days a week, just keeping the shop's lights on, same as my father before me, so it made sense at the time to let a man with a business mind take the weight off my shoulders. I signed the paperwork Roy put in front of me, without reading past the first page. That was my mistake, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend it wasn't. My daughter-in-law, Priya, gave birth to my first grandchild this past February, a little girl named Rosalind, and the moment they laid her in my arms in that hospital room, I understood something about my own father I'd never fully understood before. This feeling like your whole chest has been rearranged around one small person you'd walk into traffic for. Priya's family is from Trenton, her mother a school teacher, her father runs a small pharmacy, and the first time they all came to our house for Easter, Priya's mother brought a pie she'd made from scratch and stayed in my kitchen for 2 hours afterward, washing every dish by hand, refusing to let me help, telling me she'd heard I'd had a hip replacement and wasn't about to let me stand on it. My wife Marlene cried a little in the pantry that night, the good kind, the kind you cry when you realize your family just got bigger in a way that feels earned instead of given. We loved that family before Rosalind ever came into the world. The christening was set for a Sunday in late June, held at Caleb's church, and followed by a reception at a converted grain mill out near the river, a place called Millbrook Hall, all exposed brick and big windows looking out over the water, the kind of venue that photographs beautiful but costs accordingly. Here's the part I need you to hold on to, because it matters later. Tuesday, June 16th, 6:45 in the evening. Millbrook Hall called my cell phone directly, not Caleb's, mine, because I was listed as the secondary contact on the deposit paperwork. Final balance, $9,400, due by that Friday, or they'd release the date to the next family on the waiting list. I called Roy. He didn't pick up. I called again the next morning before I opened the shop, and he answered on maybe the fifth ring, and I could hear a television going somewhere behind him. Sounded like one of those court shows. I sent that payment out 3 weeks ago, he told me, flat, like he was reading it off a card. They're saying they never received it, Roy, I said. Then that's on their end, not mine, he said, and there was a pause. And then, I've got some things going on right now, Gerald. I need to focus on those. And he hung up before I could ask him what things going on even meant. My own father's money, sitting in an account this man swore to protect, and he was talking about it like a bill he'd already forgotten paying. Marlene and I didn't say one word of it to Caleb or Priya. We pulled $9,400 out of the account we'd been quietly building toward replacing our roof, which had been patched twice already and wasn't going to make it through another Pennsylvania winter, and we wired it to Millbrook Hall that same afternoon. We decided our granddaughter's christening was not going to be the day our son found out his uncle by marriage couldn't be trusted with his grandfather's money. We told ourselves we'd deal with Roy after the day was over, once everyone had gone home happy and nobody's Sunday best had a single stain on it. If any of you watching have ever quietly covered for somebody in your own family just to protect somebody else's happy day, tell me down in the comments, because I have a feeling I am nowhere near the only father who's done exactly that. The day itself, I'll tell you honestly, sits near the top of the best days of my whole life. Rosalind didn't cry once during the baptism, just looked up at the priest with these enormous dark eyes like she was studying him for a test later. Priya's grandmother, a small woman named Aisha who'd flown in from Ohio despite her doctor telling her not to travel, held my arm the whole reception and told me in a quiet voice that my father would have been so proud of the man his son turned into, which nearly finished me right there in front of 40 guests. There was a gift table set up near the entrance of Millbrook Hall, white linen cloth, and on it sat a small carved wooden box, a family heirloom actually, one that had been in Priya's family for 2 generations, used at every christening and wedding to collect cards and cash gifts for the child. I remember a young server named Marcus, who kept quietly refilling old Ash's water glass without ever being asked twice. No fuss about it, just doing the decent thing because it was the decent thing to do. Small detail, but I noticed it, and I've thought about it more than once since. I also noticed, somewhere around 8:40 that evening, Roy standing near that gift table a little too long, phone in his hand but not really looking at it, glancing around the room in a way that didn't match a man just checking a text message. I noticed it the way you notice a picture on the wall hanging slightly crooked, enough to register somewhere in the back of your mind, not enough to actually walk over and straighten it. I told myself he was probably just waiting for Diane to finish talking to somebody so they could leave together. I didn't walk over. I didn't ask. I have replayed those 15 or 20 seconds in my head more times than I could ever count since that night. 3 days later, Wednesday, June 25th, 11:30 in the morning, right in the middle of repairing a Whirlpool dryer motor, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Denise Okafor, general manager over at Millbrook Hall. Her voice had that careful, rehearsed steadiness of somebody who's made calls like this before and dreads every single one of them. Mr. Hensley, we had a routine review of our security footage after the weekend. Mostly standard procedure tied to our insurance policy. Nothing unusual on our end normally, But something came up that I believe you need to see for yourself. In person, if that's possible. Just you, if you don't mind, she said. And please, don't mention this to your son yet. Not until you've had a chance to see it with your own eyes. I sat in the cab of my delivery van in the parking lot behind my own shop for nearly 25 minutes before I could make myself call her back to set a time. If your stomach's gone tight reading this, that's exactly where mine was sitting. Let's keep going together. Friday, June 27th, 2 in the afternoon. Denise Okafor's office smelled like burnt coffee and cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, waiting to be broken down. She turned her monitor toward me without much of a preamble and pressed play. Black and white footage, time-stamped 8:41 p.m. The gift table sat in the lower corner of the frame. Roy, in that same navy suit he'd worn all day, glanced left, then right, then lifted the lid of that carved wooden box. The little clasp on the front had come loose sometime during the reception. Nobody had noticed, and it wasn't holding the lid shut the way it should have. He reached in, pulled out what looked like 3 or 4 envelopes, and slid them into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The entire thing took maybe 9 seconds. Then he set the lid back down, straightened his tie, and walked off toward the bar like a man with absolutely nothing on his mind. We flag anything involving guest property as a matter of policy, Denise told me, quiet and professional the whole time. I wanted you to see this yourself before it went anywhere near a formal report, in case there was some kind of misunderstanding. Sometimes family members grab the wrong envelope by mistake. It wasn't a mistake. I knew that the instant I saw the look on his face in that footage, he wasn't confused. He was checking to see who was watching him. I didn't say much to Denise beyond thanking her. I asked for a copy of the footage, and instead of driving home, I drove straight to my accountant's office. This is where the story I believed I was living in turned into an entirely different one. My accountant, a woman named Corinne Vasquez, who's kept my shop's books for nearly 15 years, pulled the quarterly trust statements Roy had been mailing us for the past 3 years, the ones I'd been too busy or too trusting to ever really sit down and study line by line. Once she laid those side by side against the bank's actual account history, which she requested directly from the branch with my written authorization, the gap between the two was ugly. My father's account hadn't been quietly earning modest interest the way Roy's statements claimed year after year. It had been steadily drained. 6 separate withdrawals over nearly 3 years, totaling just under $11,000, every single one sitting just below the threshold that would have triggered an automatic notice to the other co-signers on the account. Roy hadn't only helped himself to envelopes off a gift table at a christening. He had been quietly bleeding my father's cigar box money for years, banking on the idea that grief and trust would keep the rest of us from ever looking too closely. That night, I sat at my own kitchen table with the bank statements spread out under the lamp, and I wasn't shaking with rage the way you might expect a man in my position to shake. Something colder settled into my chest instead, the specific, level-headed calm of a man who has simply stopped making excuses for somebody he loves. I didn't want to scream at my brother-in-law. I wanted the plain truth sitting in front of him with nowhere left for him to hide it. Marlene found me there past midnight, still staring at those numbers. I told her everything, start to finish. Millbrook Hall, the $9,400 we'd quietly covered ourselves, the security footage, the bank statements. She didn't cry either. She just said, "Your father would want it made right, not turned into a war. Made right." That phrase stuck with me the rest of that week. I called Roy that Wednesday night. No answer. Thursday, 5 missed calls. By Friday, it was up to 11. Saturday, 16. I want to be clear. I wasn't chasing him down to scream at him through a phone. I was giving him every chance to call me back on his own before Corinne finished the formal accounting, and before I sat down with our family's attorney, a man named Philip Osei, who'd handled my father's estate from the very beginning. Roy never once returned the call. 18 missed calls by the time I finally drove out to his and Diane's place that Sunday evening, unannounced, because I couldn't stand the silence between us any longer. He answered the door already talking before I'd even said hello. "Whatever this is about, Gerald, I really don't have it in me tonight." "I have the footage, Roy," I told him, and I kept my voice level, never once raised it. I have Corinne's numbers too. $11,000 pulled from my father's account over almost 3 years. You want to explain that to me? Or should I explain it to you? He went quiet, in a way I had genuinely never seen from that man before. Roy is somebody who has always had a smooth answer ready for anything, usually a clever one, usually delivered like he's doing you some kind of favor by bothering to explain it at all. That evening, standing on his own front porch under that yellow bug light, he had nothing. He looked past my shoulder out toward the street, instead of looking at me, and after a long, long silence, he finally said, "I was going to put it back." "When, Roy?" I asked him. "Before or after my granddaughter's christening reception, the one your late father-in-law's money nearly didn't get to pay for?" He didn't have an answer for that one either. My voice never rose the entire conversation. It didn't need to. He was the one falling apart, standing there, not me. I want to stop here and say this plainly, because I know some of you are waiting for me to tell you I called the police that night, or stood up at a family dinner and tore him apart in front of everybody. That is not what this channel has ever been about, and it's not what my father would have wanted from me. I handed Corinne's complete accounting over to Philip Osei the following week. Roy was required to repay every single dollar into a brand new trust, one that I now oversee directly, with Asha, of all people, Priya's grandmother, named as co-trustee alongside me, because at this point in my life I trust that woman's judgment more than I trust my own sister's husband. Millbrook Hall's footage went into the formal record as part of that accounting, quietly, not paraded anywhere, not turned into some public spectacle at a family gathering. No handcuffs, no scene, just the truth, laid out plainly, where nobody could argue it away anymore, and my father's money finally going back to exactly where he always meant it to land. Caleb and Priya still don't know the full weight of what actually happened. We told them there was a paperwork mix-up with the trust that got straightened out and left it there. Someday, once Rosalind is old enough to understand and Caleb has a little more distance from all of it, I'll sit him down and tell him the whole thing, cigar boxes and all. Not yet, though. Diane and I are speaking again, but carefully. The way you speak to somebody when you're both still figuring out how much weight the bridge between you can actually hold. Roy came to the 4th of July cookout at my house this summer. He sat near the far end of the picnic table, didn't say much, and neither did I. I honestly don't know if we'll ever be what we were before that footage played on Denise Okafor's monitor, and I've made a kind of uneasy peace with not knowing. Some things in a family you manage to fix. Some things you simply stop pretending were ever fixed to begin with. What I keep circling back to, more nights than I'd like to admit, is my father sitting at that same kitchen table, folding silver dollars and $20 bills into a cigar box for 19 straight years, believing every single time that the money would eventually land exactly where he intended it to land. It did, in the end. It just took a lot longer, and cost this family a great deal more than it ever should have. I think about that young server, Marcus, refilling an old woman's water glass for no reason except that it was the kind thing to do. I think about how little it truly takes to become the kind of person somebody remembers as decent, and how a grown man can stand 3 feet from that example all evening and still choose to open a gift box instead. If there's one thing I hope you carry away from this story tonight, it isn't about locking your cash boxes tighter or trusting your own family less than you already do. It's simpler than that. Pay attention to the 15 seconds that feel just slightly wrong. I watched my brother-in-law stand at that gift table a beat too long, and I looked away because looking away was easier than walking over and asking a simple question. Don't look away. You don't have to accuse a single soul of anything. Just ask. If tonight's story meant something to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this family goes next, because there's more of this story I haven't told you yet. And down in the comments, tell me, have you ever had to quietly protect somebody's happy day by cleaning up a mess they never even knew was sitting right behind them? I'll be reading every single answer tonight before I turn off this lamp. This has been our family story. I'll see you in the next one.